You are listening to TBR Radio Presents, the Dixie Heritage Show, with your host, the director of Dixie Heritage, Dr. Ed DeVries.
I can't believe how much the world has changed just in the last week. In fact, as I look at the world, it's changed so much in the last few months since the pandemic began that it's like the way things were just a few months ago seems as though that were years ago, like it was another lifetime. I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of the things that are happening, and we're still trying, of course. We hear a lot of conversation now about finding the new normal. I'll be brutally honest, I don't want a new normal. I like things the way they were. Not that we didn't have problems and not that we weren't struggling and fighting to make things better. Obviously we were. But, I'm not trying to find a new normal. I want to go back to the old normal. But that's probably never going to happen. At any rate, I never in a million years would have foreseen what we have happening today. In fact, I was talking to our editor at TBR, Paul Angel, earlier today, and I was telling him how my personal opinion is that we hear so many things about, when is the righteous indignation going to begin? When is the counter-revolution going to begin? When are decent, God-fearing, law-abiding Southerners just going to rise up and say enough is enough? Well, I honestly believe that was going to happen. And not just Southerners, but I believe that just righteous, decent, godly, law-abiding, patriotic Americans all over the country, from east to west, north to south, all across the fruited plain. I believe that we were starting to see things that, in other words, I believe that the revolution was about to begin. And I believe that scared certain people beyond comprehension. And so what they did was they stirred up the people who are now rioting and looting and tearing down our monuments and destroying our civil society, because now that they're out there doing it, people like you and I are not fighting the good fight. In other words, we never rose up to say enough is enough, we want our country back. We never rose up to say enough is enough, we're going back to the Constitution. We never rose up to say enough is enough, we're not wearing these masks, we're not staying at home, we're not keeping our businesses shuttered. This is the land of the free and the home of the brave, and we are bravely going to exercise our freedoms. That day never happened. It was about to happen, but it didn't happen. You say, well, why not? Because the primates started burning down the zoo. And so I believe that all of the unrest that we're seeing now is planned, that it was orchestrated, and that it was brought about so that good people like you and I would never take to the streets ourselves. What I do find interesting is in Michigan, for example, there was a group of thousands of armed patriots who took their state legislature, their state capitol building. They never fired a shot. They never had to. But they showed up. They took the building. They forced the members of their state legislature to hear them. And they said enough is enough. The media crucified them. They were neo-Nazis. They were neo-Confederates. They were radicals and extremists. But yet, when this other group is forming violent mobs and they're tearing down our monuments, and it's not just Confederate monuments. We're seeing monuments to Abraham Lincoln torn down now. Monuments to Teddy Roosevelt being torn down. Christopher Columbus. Monuments to Catholic priests. The list goes on and on. They tear down these monuments. They burn our cities. They loot and they rape and they pillage and they maim and they destroy. But they're not extremists according to our media. They're not given mean names by our media. No, the media is lauding what they're doing. Anyways, what we're seeing is the violent takeover and the violent overthrow of the country that we all knew and loved just a few months ago. And rather than myself trying to articulate this, because I already feel like I'm failing at doing so, What I'm going to do is I'm going to play a clip from Tucker Carlson's TV show last night, and I believe that he articulates these things far better than I am capable of doing. But before we go to that Tucker Carlson clip, let's first go to a word from our sponsor, the Barnes Review.
Web browser and type in www.barnesreview.org and discover the Barnes Review magazine. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There is no more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review magazine in its print form, or in convenient electronic delivery. Our host has been a subscriber to both formats for years. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
This is happening all over the country, as you know, and there's a reason for it. Over the weekend, most recently, doubtless you've heard of this, city officials announced their plan to remove the statue of Teddy Roosevelt from outside New York's Museum of Natural History. The bronze statue has stood there in the Theodore Roosevelt Rotunda facing Central Park since before the Second World War. Soon it will be gone. People who erected that statue 80 years ago would be confused by this, no doubt. They did not consider Teddy Roosevelt a controversial figure. In fact, Roosevelt was the most popular president in American history. He was also the most American president. No other country could have produced Teddy Roosevelt. Roosevelt's virtues mirrored the values of America. He was physically brave, he was profoundly literate, highly self-disciplined, and amazingly energetic. While still a college student, Roosevelt wrote a 2-volume history of the War of 1812 that is still in print today. You can buy it on Amazon. He was the youngest president in our history. He saved our economy from corporate monopolies. And by doing that, he made the American middle class possible. He created the national parks, he created the Panama Canal, the Food and Drug Administration. And then he kept going. The list of Teddy Roosevelt's achievements fills entire shelves of biographies. Those are in addition to the more than 40 books he wrote himself on topics ranging from Oliver Cromwell to cattle ranching to social justice. Personally, Roosevelt was a famously decent man. In 1901, he invited his friend Booker T. Washington to dinner. No African American had ever eaten in the White House. Democrats roared with rage at the idea. For the crime of having a meal with a black man, they attacked Teddy Roosevelt and his wife for the rest of their lives. But Roosevelt never bowed. He gave the finger to the mob, and he continued cheerfully on. Teddy Roosevelt was a hero to millions of Americans. He still is. That's precisely why they're tearing down his statue. They know that if they can force you to watch as they topple your heroes, they have won. There's nothing they can't do next. They can decide how you raise your children, how you vote, what you're allowed to believe. Once they've humiliated you, they can control you. And that's why, across the country, mobs are tearing down America's monuments. In the cities of Richmond and St. Paul, Minnesota, they've torn down statues of Christopher Columbus. They did the same thing in Boston. Boston's mayor now says it's time to remove a statue of Abraham Lincoln, the man who freed the slaves. It's racist. In Dallas, they pulled a Texas Ranger statue out of the airport after more than 50 years. In Dearborn, Michigan, they toppled a statue of the former mayor. They did the same thing in Philadelphia. In Nashville, they pulled down a statue of a former U.S. senator. Same in Albany. In Oregon, Thomas Jefferson and George Washington were torn down. In San Francisco, the mob demolished statues of Ulysses S. Grant, Junipero Serra, and Francis Scott Key. On the pedestal of the Key Monument, they spray-painted "Kill the Colonizers" and "Kill Whitey," just in case you missed the point. One thing all of these Americans, now canceled, have in common: not one of them fought for the Confederacy. Pulling down their statues had nothing to do with the Civil War, at least not the first Civil War, the one that took place 150 years ago. Democrats understand that very well, and they support all of it. In every place where the mob has destroyed public monuments, Democratic leaders have backed them as they did it. But at the same time, and you should know this, so have many Republicans. Last week, a mob in downtown Washington, D.C. decided to tear down a statue of a man called Albert Pike. Pike was famous as a journalist and a poet, and later as a prominent Freemason. For less than a year, from late November of 1861 to mid-July of 1862, Pike served in the Confederate Army. Pike was later arrested for treason against the Confederacy, and he faced execution for that. But in the end, it didn't save him from the mob. They set fire to Pike's effigy as it lay on the ground. At least one prominent conservative tweeted his approval of this. Republicans in Congress said nothing at all, and they could have. Pike's now destroyed statue is owned by the National Park Service. It's federal property. Tearing it down was a federal crime. But no one in Washington even considered enforcing that law. Kevin McCarthy of California, the top Republican in the House, was not in a position to say much of anything. McCarthy has endorsed the removal of statues that the left has designated as racist. Last week, as violent mobs roamed the country destroying public property, Kevin McCarthy refused to acknowledge it on his official Twitter account. On Wednesday, McCarthy did manage to send a very emphatic tweet calling for sanctions against Syria, quote, to hold the Assad regime responsible for its atrocities. Elected Republicans, almost all of them, are in no hurry to stop the disorder. They appear to believe what we're watching is a version of the Rodney King riots from 1992. People saw an upsetting video on the internet. They're angry, and that's understandable. But they'll calm down soon, and we can get back to cutting capital gains taxes and sanctioning Bashar al-Assad. That's their view of it. They are wrong. This is not a momentary civil disturbance. This is a serious and highly organized political movement. It is not superficial. It is deep and profound. It has vast ambitions. It is insidious. It will grow. Its goal is to end liberal democracy and challenge Western civilization itself. This is an ideological movement. The ideas that fuel it have incubated for decades on college campuses. We paid for all of it, by the way. The rest of us were so thrilled that our kids got into Duke that we decided to ignore what Duke was actually teaching them and just continued to send big checks. That was a mistake. It was one of the gravest mistakes we've ever made. We didn't appreciate the stakes involved at the time, and as a result of that, we became easy marks for their lies. Even now, so many of us continue to pretend that this is about police brutality. It's about the death of a man called George Floyd in Minneapolis. We still imagine we can fix it by regulating chokeholds or spending more on de-escalation training. We are too literal, we're too good-hearted to understand what's really happening. Our decency is the mob's main weapon against us. We have no idea who we're up against. For most people, the primary joy in life is the act of creation, making something good and useful, whether it's dinner for your family or a deck off the back of your house or a solid day at work. The most profound act of creation, of course, is having children, new life itself. Healthy societies celebrate all of this. They understand that the impulse to create is how civilizations are built. But they also recognize that there are forces arrayed against creation, and they vigilantly defend themselves against those. In every society, there are those who seek to destroy. They destroy for the same reason that troubled boys torture dogs or shoot house cats. Inflicting pain makes them feel powerful. We used to call people like that antisocial forces. They still exist, we just pretend they don't. Or worse, we excuse their behavior. We coddle them, we fund them. Wall Street sends the money in the hope that they will be destroyed last. The rest of us just look on confused. We don't really know what's happening. But the destroyers know. They know exactly what's going on. Never in American history have they been more emboldened than they are now. Just this afternoon around lunchtime, an activist called Sean King issued the following demand on Twitter, quote, all murals and stained glass windows of white Jesus and his European mother and their white friends should also come down. They are a gross form of white supremacy, created as tools of oppression, racist propaganda. They should all come down. End quote. Before you dismiss that idea as absurd, the rantings of some crank on social media, keep in mind that Sean King is the most famous Black Lives Matter leader in this country. Black Lives Matter is now more popular than either major political party. So don't be surprised when they come for your church. Why wouldn't they? No one is stopping them. The forces of destruction have grand ambitions. It's not just about the Teddy Roosevelt statue. They plan to rule this country. What will happen if they do? Well, you may imagine that self-defense is your bulwark against chaos. In this country, you assume, you can always defend yourself and your family. That's a pillar of our civilization, of all Western civilizations. This woman assumed that too. On Wednesday, she was driving through Louisville, Kentucky. According to Louisville police, the woman found herself surrounded by protesters who were blocking the road. They stood in front of her car with a megaphone. She argued with them to let her pass. One of them produced a gun. The woman tried to flee. We're showing the dramatic tape on your screen right now. Look at it. When the woman stopped at a red light a block later, another protester pointed a gun at her again. She hit the gas and made it home alive. On Sunday, National Public Radio published an article about the incident. The headline of that piece, quote, Vehicle attacks rise as extremists target protesters. In other words, for trying to escape from being murdered, NPR called this woman an extremist who was, quote, targeting protesters. Think about that, and you'll begin to understand why so few citizens have tried to stop the mobs as they pillage our country. Antifa doesn't own the statues in your city's parks. It doesn't own your city. You do. You help pay for it. But what would happen if you tried to defend public property, or even if you tried to defend your own property? You know the answer. You'd be swarmed by federal agents. You'd be Roger Stoned with the help and complicity of CNN and NPR and so many others. You'd be the criminal. There's no question. You've seen this happen before. To a remarkable degree, federal law enforcement is now driven by political imperatives. Certain kinds of so-called hate crimes top the list of priorities. They'll draw the FBI faster than you could summon the local police to your house during a home invasion, even when, as is so often the case, they turn out to be hoaxes. Meanwhile, actual hate crimes, brutal crimes in which Americans are gravely injured, are ignored completely. They take place on our streets with shocking regularity. The media don't cover them. They often go unpunished entirely. That's not speculation. There's quite a bit of video of it online, some of it very recent. We're not going to show you the clips. If you're interested, go to the Twitter feed for the Matt Walsh blog before Twitter pulls it down. You'll get the point. But you already know. Laws are not applied equally in America. Some victims are considered more deserving than others, despite the fact we're all citizens. Justice is not blind. Never in our lives has this been more true than it is right now, and is very likely to get worse. That's the aim of this movement, of these riots, to overthrow the value, the principle of equality under the law. After November, that trend could accelerate dramatically. And by the way, we should stop pretending that this is an election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. There is no Joe Biden. The Joe Biden you remember no longer exists. The babbling husk you see may have the same name and similar features, but behind the mask there is nothing but a jumbled collection of talking points from the early 70s. Turn on your record player, no malarkey. The candidate has no independent thoughts of his own. He has no core beliefs. He is empty. He is a perfect Trojan horse. For the people who've taken over the Democratic Party, he is perfect. Their plan is to ride him to power. Once there, someone tough and calculating and purposeful, Kamala Harris probably, will change the country. How? Well, they've showed us how. For 3 years, they told us that secret Russian agents had taken over the U.S. government. There was never a single piece of evidence to show that that was true in any way. It was a hoax, and yet it worked. They dominated the country with that lie, and that was their dry run. Can we convince millions of people to believe something that's completely absurd? Yes, we can. That's what they learned. That's the lesson. They'll do it again. This time, the Russians will be Confederate sympathizers or Nazis or white supremacists or whatever other name they choose to give to their political opponents. It almost doesn't matter. But once they pick one, they will gin up mass hysteria because that's what they're good at. The media will collaborate fully because that's their job. And we'll have another witch hunt, once again with the full support of federal law enforcement and intelligence agencies. And who knows, maybe the military too, because the threat is just that profound. A few foolish souls will attempt to point out the obvious, what's true. Of course there are racists here, as there are everywhere. But overall, this is the least racist country in the history of the world. Millions of Africans want to move here. Many already have. Our last president was black. What are you talking about? Those people will be silenced. Anyone who defies the narrative will be silenced. By that point, the category of hate speech will have expanded to include anything they don't want to hear, and it will be criminalized, a federal offense. You watch. If they can tear down a Lincoln statue because it's racist, they can ban the First Amendment. You don't want to live in a place like that. Who can save us from that? Well, as of right now, only Republicans can save us from that. Not because they're inherently virtuous, not because they want to, they don't, but because they're the opposition party, to the extent they still have opposition to anything. We have no choice but to ask for their help. The Republican Party is the only power center left in this country available to people who dissent. It doesn't matter who you voted for last time. This is not an endorsement of anyone's policies. It's an acknowledgement of who holds power and who doesn't. And the Republican Party is the only power center available. On Friday, Vince Coglianese, the Daily Caller, interviewed Donald Trump in the White House. Coglianese asked the president why he hasn't sent federal troops to stop the chaos in cities like Seattle. Here's how the president answered, quote, "Right now, I think it's great sitting back and watching this catastrophe," end quote. We understand the point he was making. These are liberal cities, and they're destroying themselves. Their policies don't work. This is what you get when you vote for liberals. But it's still the wrong answer. A president is responsible for all Americans, no matter where they live, for the country itself. Imagine if you had a bitter argument with one of your children. The kid runs out of the house, then goes completely off the deep end and becomes a heroin addict, living on the street. But you don't look for him. You don't try and save him. Instead, you brag that his drug addiction is proof you were right all along. Right now, I think it's great sitting back and watching this catastrophe. You wouldn't say that. No good parent would say that. No president should say it either. We need help, and we need it right now. These are not protests. This is a totalitarian political movement, and someone needs to save the country.
Extra, read all about it.
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
Extra, extra, read all about it.
A friend of this radio show, and he's been a guest a couple of different times over the years, is Sid Secular. Sid, for a number of years, was the editor over at the Citizen's Informer, and he retired from that position, I believe, last year. But yet he stayed busy in the journalism field and in organizing patriotic events. And Sid sent an interesting piece to our newsletter, the weekly Dixie Heritage letter, that as I read it in my email the other day, I thought it was just one of the most profound things that I have ever read. Or at least I should say one of the most profound things that I have read recently. That's a better way to put that. Anyways, let me go ahead and read that to you right now. It's called Strange Happenings by Sid Secular, and it said this. It said, "A very well orchestrated plan, or an unimaginable set of events that just fell into place with the United States front and center. Scare people with a virus, place them in quarantine, count the number of dead every second of every day in every news headline, close all the businesses. 350 million, or rather 35 million, are instantly unemployed. Remove entertainment and prohibit recreation by closing parks, gyms, bars, restaurants, and sports. Don't allow any dating, no touching, isolate people, dehumanize them, close their temples and churches, prohibit their worship, create a vacuum, and let depression, anxiety, hopelessness, and desperation set in. And then ignite hatred and civil unrest, creating a civil war. Empty the prisons because of the virus and fill the streets with criminals. Send in Antifa to vandalize property as if they are freedom fighters. Undermine the law, riot, loot, and attack all law enforcement, but tell government to order a stand down. Then defund law enforcement and abolish the police. We're all being played by those who want to destroy America, because this is how you destroy a nation from within, and within a very short order. Will it work? I guess that depends on you and me."
Welcome to the Christendom curriculum. You know, every parent who decides to homeschool wants to secure a great education for their child, while also saving time and money. But these days, many parents have another concern. They also want a homeschool curriculum without all the multiculturalist, politically correct diversity doctrine that's really little more than a thin disguise for an anti-Christian, anti-American, and anti-Western civilization bias. Now there is such a curriculum. The Christendom curriculum gives your children a complete education in Bible, history, literature, and more, focusing on the classic academic skills of reading, writing, and arithmetic. But we also tell the story of Christendom, the story of the Christian nations, especially as Christ's kingdom has been historically manifest in the nations of Europe and America. And we do so without apology. The Christendom curriculum is the only Christian nationalist homeschool program you'll find. We support the right of the European and American peoples to their historic Christian cultures against the globalist leftists who want to destroy those cultures. Not only that, but we provide assigned reading courses for various hot-button subjects in our current culture wars, including feminism, social justice, and cultural Marxism, among others. These reading courses will teach your kids how to survive a social justice warrior attack, how to debate with leftists on social media, how to reform their local churches and communities, and more. We're living in a time of tremendous historical and social change. Christians have the opportunity now to begin building the culture and civilization of the next 1,000 years and beyond. It's an exciting time to be alive. So if you want to help raise the next generation of culture warriors, if you want your children to grow up with a love for Christ's kingdom and for their own nation, while at the same time learning how to defend America and rebuild the West, the easy-to-use Christendom curriculum is for you. Click the Learn More button to get in on the action. And thanks for listening.
Like I said at the beginning of today's show, if this is the new normal in America, I do not like it. Maybe you remember the stanza from America the Beautiful that begins, "Oh, beautiful for patriots' dream." But that dream, it would seem, has regressed into what is now the patriots' nightmare. My prayer is that with the angry mobs burning our cities and all that was once sacred within them, my prayer is that these angry mobs will do what all angry mobs eventually do, and that is to turn upon themselves. If we look in Seattle's Capitol Hill occupied protest zone, or CHOP, if that's any example, the mob's already turning on itself. And my prayer is that for the sake of all that is still sacred in this country, that will come sooner rather than later.
Hello, I'm Tom Strain, Lieutenant Commander-in-Chief of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. The Confederate flag, Confederate symbols, and the reputation of our Confederate ancestors has come under attack. The Sons of Confederate Veterans is actively fending off our detractors, but there is only so much that we can do. We need your help. Contact your local, state, and national elected politicians and tell them that you will not tolerate these attacks on our heritage. You can also visit scv.org, download an application to join us in our fight to preserve our Southern heritage. Visit scv.org today. If you don't have a Confederate ancestor and you are tired of American history disappearing, you can assist us by becoming a friend of the SCV. Please visit scvheritagedefense.org and make a donation to the Heritage Defense Fund. We hope that you will join us in the fight to defend the Confederate soldiers' good name.
And on that word, we are all but out of time for this week's TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Show. What I'd like to do is I would like to encourage you to go to my website, www.dixieheritage.net, www.dixieheritage.net. When you are there, you can sign up for my free weekly email newsletter, the Dixie Heritage Letter. And the Dixie Heritage Letter, every Friday, I send you a couple dozen pages of news, information, articles, keeping you up to date on all the things that are going on. Unfortunately, monuments are coming down right now faster than we can report on them, but we do our best to keep you abreast of all that's going on and just to keep you informed, keep you educated, give you the information that you need so that you can fight the culture war, so that you can stand for our heritage, so that you can defend the Confederate soldiers' good name. When you sign up for the weekly email newsletter, which, by the way, I send absolutely free of charge, no cost, no obligation, I also send you along with it a free copy of my best-selling book, The Truth About the Confederate Battle Flag. And both of those will come to your email box without cost, without obligation. You don't have to give us a credit card number. You never have to mail us a check. You don't have to give us your phone number, so we're not going to call you or sell your phone number to telemarketers. You don't have to worry about any of those things. And so go to www.dixieheritage.net, and while you're there, check out the bookstore. There are some great books in there. that I know will be a blessing to you. Anyways, we are out of time. So from all of us here at TBR Radio, God bless, and I will talk to you again next week.